Victoria. I'm a prisoner. She's taken everything.
I know. Stay strong. I'm getting help. Are you truly happy? Or is that just the story she tells you?
Mom, we think it's time you see a specialist. Just to help.
Whatever you think is best, dear.
Hello, my dear friends, and welcome back to Voices of Auntie Sandra. They say that home is where the heart is. It's supposed to be your sanctuary, your safe harbor in the storm of life. But what happens when that harbor becomes a prison? What do you do when the people you love most, the ones you would give your life for, start building the walls of that prison around you, brick by painful brick? My story is not an easy one to tell, but I have to share it. For anyone out there who feels unheard, invisible, or trapped in their own home, I need you to know you're not alone. And I need you to know that even in the deepest darkness, there is a strength inside you that you may have forgotten you possess. Now settle in. Let me take you back to how it all began, in my quiet little house in Austin, Texas. My name is Martha Lee Coleman, and for the better part of my 68 years, my life was painted in soft, gentle colors. The brightest of them all was my Richard. He was a man whose laughter could make the Texas bluebonnets seem to stand a little taller. For 40 years, this house was our canvas. Every faded mark on the wooden floor was a dance step, every chipped teacup a memory of a shared morning coffee. When cancer took him from me 10 years ago, the colors of my world muted to a soft gray, and the silence in these rooms became a constant, humming ache. I was a nurse for over 30 years. I've held the hands of the dying and welcomed new life into the world. I thought I understood the full spectrum of human strength and fragility. I thought I was prepared for the quiet loneliness of widowhood. But nothing prepares you for the sheer weight of an empty house, a house that was once filled with so much love. That's why, when my only son David and his wife Vanessa suggested they move in, it felt like the sun was breaking through the clouds. David, my sweet boy, was now a man of 38, with a demanding job in software sales that kept him perpetually stressed. And Vanessa, at 35, was a vision of modern grace, smart, beautiful, and always so perfectly put together. "Mom, it just makes sense," David had said, his hand covering mine on the kitchen table. "We're saving for a bigger place, and you're here all alone. We can help with the upkeep, and you won't be so lonely." Vanessa had chimed in, her voice as smooth as honey. "And I'd love it, Martha. We could have dinner together. I could help in the garden. It would be my honor to help take care of the woman who raised this wonderful man." Her words were a balm to my soul. The thought of family dinners, of hearing footsteps on the stairs again, of not having to face the long evenings alone, it was everything I'd been secretly praying for. So, they moved in, bringing with them a whirlwind of boxes, laughter, and a sense of life that had been absent for a decade. The first year was wonderful. Vanessa was the daughter I never had. She insisted on calling me Mom. She'd sit with me on the porch swing, listening to my old stories about Richard, her eyes full of what I believed was genuine sympathy. She praised my cooking, organized my pantry, and took over the grocery shopping. "You've worked hard your whole life, Mom," she'd say, tucking a stray gray hair behind my ear. "It's time for you to relax and let us take care of you." I relaxed into their care, feeling safe and cherished. I didn't notice at first the subtle shifts. It began with small things, little comments that seemed born of concern. One afternoon, I spent a frantic 20 minutes searching for my reading glasses, only to find them perched on my own head. We all had a good laugh about it. Later that evening, however, I overheard Vanessa talking to David in the kitchen, her voice a soft, worried murmur. "David, honey, I don't want to alarm you, but your mom seems so confused today. She couldn't find her glasses for the longest time, and she asked me this morning if it was Tuesday when it's clearly Wednesday. I'm just a little worried, that's all." David's reply was muffled, but the tone was laced with concern. I stood in the hallway, my heart sinking. It was just a simple mistake, wasn't it? I'd always been a bit absent-minded. But hearing it framed that way, as a symptom, a sign of decline, planted a seed of doubt in my mind. The concerned comments became more frequent. If I forgot an ingredient at the store, Vanessa would sigh and say, "Oh, Mom, don't you worry your pretty little head. I'll run out and get it. Then she'd tell David later, your mom's memory is getting a bit hazy. We need to be patient with her. She started managing the household bills, a task Richard and I had always shared. It's just too much for you to keep track of, Mom, she explained, taking the stack of envelopes from my hand with a gentle but firm grip. Let me handle this. It's no trouble at all. It felt less like a help and more like a dismissal, but I pushed the feeling down. I didn't want to be ungrateful. The first real chill of fear snaked down my spine the day I couldn't find my savings passbook. It was a small, worn, blue book that held the nest egg Richard and I had painstakingly built over 40 years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine, a symbol of our life's work. I kept it in the top drawer of the antique writing desk in my bedroom, Richard's desk. I searched the drawer, then the entire desk, my hands starting to tremble. It was always there. Always. I found Vanessa in the living room, calmly folding laundry. Vanessa, dear, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Have you seen my blue savings passbook? It was in my desk, and I can't seem to locate it. She didn't even look up from the shirt she was folding. Oh, that, she said casually. I put it away for you in the safe deposit box. I was organizing your important papers and thought it would be much safer at the bank. You know, with your memory being what it is lately, I'd hate for you to misplace it. My blood ran cold. She hadn't asked. She had simply taken it. My memory? I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. She finally looked at me, her expression a perfect mask of gentle pity. Yes, Mom. You know, we've talked about this. It's okay. That's why we're here. To help you. She smiled, a sweet, serene smile that didn't reach her eyes. In that moment, looking at my daughter-in-law, I didn't feel cared for. I felt like a child. And for the first time in my own home, I felt the unmistakable terrifying feeling of being managed. The gray colors of my world, which I thought were brightening, were slowly, imperceptibly turning dark. The incident with the passbook was a turning point. The moment a quiet unease blossomed into a cold, hard knot of dread in my stomach. The house no longer felt like a shared home. It felt like occupied territory, and I was slowly losing ground. Vanessa's sweetness now seemed coated in a thin, brittle veneer, and I started noticing the flickers of impatience in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. My connection to the outside world was the next thing to be severed. It happened with the same disarming logic she used for everything. I was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to text my old friend from the hospital, Betty. My fingers, stiff with a touch of arthritis, fumbled on the small touchscreen of my smartphone, a gift from David a few years back. Vanessa glided over, placing a cup of chamomile tea beside me. Having trouble there, Mom? She asked, her voice dripping with sympathy. Oh, it's just this newfangled device, I admitted with a sigh. Sometimes I think it's smarter than I am. I know just the thing, she said, her eyes lighting up. The next day she presented me with a small box. Inside was a ridiculously simple phone with huge buttons like a child's toy. It had no internet, no camera, just 3 speed dial buttons. One was a picture of David, one of her, and the third was for 911. Look, she announced proudly. No more confusing apps or tiny keyboards. All you have to do is press a picture, and it will call us. So much simpler and safer for you. She took my smartphone from my hand. I'll just put this one away. We wouldn't want you getting those confusing scam calls or clicking on a virus by mistake. She said it with a bright smile, as if she'd just solved all my problems. I watched as she slipped my portal to the world, my photos of Richard, my contacts, my messages from friends into her purse. It felt like she was pocketing a piece of my soul. The final wall of my prison was erected a week later. I had mentioned wanting to buy some new rose bushes for the garden, a small joy I allowed myself every spring. I reached for my purse to get my debit card. What are you doing, Mom? Vanessa asked, her tone light but stopping me in my tracks. I was just going to order those David Austin roses I like, I explained. Vanessa gently took my purse from my hands and unzipped it. She located the wallet, pulled out my debit card, and held it between her fingers. Mom, we talked about this. It's not safe for you to be using your card online. There are so many criminals out there trying to steal from seniors. Remember that story on the news? I didn't remember, but she said it with such authority that I began to doubt myself again. From now on, you just tell me what you need, and I'll get it for you. It's no bother. I'm your daughter, and it's my job to protect you. She slipped the card into her own wallet, which snapped shut with a sound like a jail cell door clanging shut. Just like that, I was penniless. I had money in the bank, but I couldn't touch it. I had a home, but I couldn't leave without permission. I had a phone, but I could only call my captors. I tried to talk to David. I had to. I waited until a Saturday when Vanessa was out at a yoga class. He was in the garage, tinkering with the lawnmower. "David, honey," I started, my voice trembling slightly. "Can we talk for a minute?" "Sure, Mom. What's up?" he said, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. I took a deep breath. "It's about Vanessa. She took my bank card and my phone." David's brow furrowed, but not with the alarm I had hoped for. It was with a sort of weary annoyance. "Mom, she didn't take them. She's keeping them safe for you. She told me all about it. She's just worried, that's all. Like her own grandmother got taken for thousands by some phone scammer. She loves you. She's just trying to prevent that from happening." "But David, it's my money. I'm not a child. I feel trapped." The words hung in the air, heavy and desperate. David sighed, a long, drawn-out sound of frustration. "Mom, you're being overly dramatic. You're not trapped. You have everything you need right here. Vanessa is doing a wonderful job taking care of everything. Frankly, you should be grateful. She gave up a lot to move in here and help you." His words struck me harder than a physical blow. Grateful. I was supposed to be grateful for being stripped of my independence, my dignity. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, and saw a stranger whose eyes were clouded by his wife's poison. He didn't see me anymore. He only saw the frail, confused old woman Vanessa had painted for him. I retreated back into the house, defeated. My only window to the world was now my front window. I'd watched the neighbors come and go, a painful reminder of a life I no longer had access to. That's when I started paying more attention to Gloria Evans from across the street. A widow like me, Gloria was a retired history teacher who was as sharp as a tack and, I'd always suspected, a little bit nosy. She lived alone and had a routine as predictable as the sunrise. One afternoon, she came over, holding a plate of brownies covered in plastic wrap. Vanessa answered the door before I could even get up from my chair. "Gloria, how lovely to see you," Vanessa said, her voice a symphony of false warmth. She physically blocked the doorway, preventing Gloria from seeing inside. "Hello, Vanessa. I just baked a batch and thought of Martha," Gloria said, her eyes craning to look past Vanessa's shoulder. "How is she doing? I feel like I haven't seen her out in the garden in ages." "Oh, she's been a bit under the weather," Vanessa said smoothly. "Her memory's not what it used to be, you know? Some days are better than others. I'll make sure she gets one of these. Thank you so much for thinking of her." She took the plate and began to close the door. "Well, can I just say a quick hello?" Gloria pressed, her teacher's voice cutting through the sweetness. A flash of something hard and cold crossed Vanessa's face before it was replaced by a look of deep concern. "I wish you could, but she's just gone down for a nap. It's so important she gets her rest. I'll tell her you stopped by." And with that, she closed the door, leaving my friend on the porch. I hadn't been napping. I was sitting right there, in the living room, 10 feet away, invisible and silent. I heard Gloria's footsteps retreat down the path. I crept to the window and watched her walk back across the street, but just before she went inside, she stopped and looked back at my house, her brow furrowed in thought. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Someone else saw it. Someone else saw that something was wrong. Gloria's brief visit, and her subsequent look of concern, was like a single match struck in a vast, dark cavern. It was a tiny light, but it was enough to remind me that a world outside my prison still existed. However, a match can't burn forever. As days bled into weeks, the darkness crept back in, thicker and more suffocating than before. With my connections to the outside world severed, Vanessa no longer felt the need to maintain her flawless performance. The mask began to slip, at first just for moments, then for hours at a time. The sweet, caring daughter-in-law was replaced by a cold, efficient warden. My meals were placed before me with a clatter, often lukewarm. My questions about the mail or the household finances were met with a sharp, "Everything is handled, Martha. You don't need to worry about it." She began to talk about me as if I wasn't in the room. I'd be sitting in my armchair, reading, And I'd hear her on the phone with one of her friends, her voice a stage whisper. Oh, it's just exhausting. It's a full-time job, really. Some days she doesn't even remember my name. It was a lie, a cruel and blatant lie, but it was my word against hers, and I had no one to tell. David was so rarely home before I went to bed, and on weekends he was a ghost, either catching up on work or placating his increasingly demanding wife. He saw only what she allowed him to see. The day everything changed started like any other. It was a Tuesday, the day the city collected the garbage. I was standing by the window, watching the sanitation truck rumble down the street, when an official-looking letter in the mail carrier's hand caught my eye. It was from the county tax assessor's office. It was a bill I had paid myself, on time, every year for 40 years. When Vanessa came in from the mailbox, I saw her quickly slip that specific envelope into her purse. Was that the property tax bill, dear? I asked, trying to sound casual. Vanessa froze, her back to me. I told you, you don't need to worry about the bills. I know, but that one is important. I just want to make sure it's paid on time. There's a steep penalty if it's late. She turned around slowly, and the look on her face was one of pure, venomous frustration. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Paid on time? She spat, her voice a low hiss. Of course it'll be paid on time. I'm the one who has to make sure everything in this house gets paid. The lights, the water, the ridiculously high taxes on this oversized property. Do you have any idea how much it costs to keep you living here? I recoiled as if struck. What are you talking about? This house is paid for. Richard and I made sure of that. She let out a short, ugly laugh. The mortgage is paid, but the house still bleeds money, Martha. Money that David and I have to pour into it. Money that we could be saving for our own future, our own family. Instead, we're stuck here. Stuck here? I whispered, my voice trembling. I thought, you wanted to be here. We're here because we have to be, she finally yelled, throwing her purse onto a chair. We're here because you can't take care of yourself. We're here, and all you do is sit in that chair all day, contributing nothing. You're a freeloader, Martha, a burden living in our house. Our house. The words echoed in the sudden silence of the room. Not my house. Not the house Richard built with his own hands. Our house. The cruelty of it stole my breath. It was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and the strength from my legs. I sank back into my armchair, the room tilting around me. She stood there, panting slightly, her face flushed with rage. Seeing my devastated silence, a flicker of something, maybe satisfaction, passed through her eyes before she turned and stormed out of the room. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed. Her words played over and over in my head. Burden. Freeloader. Our house. Was that what I had become? A ghost in my own home? A weight on my own child? The despair was a physical thing, a thick black oil into my veins, making my limbs feel heavy and useless. I felt my identity, everything I was, a wife, a mother, a nurse, a homeowner, dissolving into nothing. I mechanically got up and went to my bedroom, closing the door. I sat on the edge of the bed Richard and I had shared for 4 decades. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to die. I looked around the room at the life we had built and felt like a complete and utter failure. My eyes fell on a dusty box in the corner of my closet, a box of Richard's old things I could never bring myself to throw away. His favorite sweaters, his dog-eared bird-watching books. My hand, moving on its own, reached into the box. Beneath a worn flannel shirt, my fingers brushed against a small hard object. I pulled it out. It was a small silver digital voice recorder. Richard had loved birdwatching. He'd spend hours in the backyard, trying to capture the specific calls of the cardinals and the mockingbirds. He'd bought this little device to record their songs. He was so proud of it. Listen, Marty, he'd say, his eyes twinkling. You can hear every single note. It captures the truth of the song. The truth of the song. Holding the small, cool metal device in my palm, something shifted inside me. My gaze drifted to a framed photograph on my nightstand. It was of me, 25 years old, in my crisp white nurse's uniform, my cap perched perfectly on my head. I looked so young, so determined. I remembered the woman in that picture. She wasn't a burden. She was a fighter. I remembered Mrs. Dable, an elderly patient with a broken hip, whose son was trying to bully her into signing over her house. I was the one who noticed the fear in her eyes. I was the one who called Adult Protective Services. I remembered a young boy with bruises on his arms who told me he'd fallen down the stairs. I was the one who sat with him, gently coaxing out the truth, and stayed by his side until he was safe. For 30 years, I had been a protector of the vulnerable. I had been their voice when they had none. I had fought for their dignity, and now, I had become one of them. Vanessa's words were meant to destroy me, to grind me down into dust. But in the depths of that despair, they had accidentally woken something up. They had woken up the nurse. I looked down at the recorder in my hand. It was more than just a memory of my husband. It was a tool. It was a weapon. Vanessa thought I was a weak, forgetful old woman. David thought I was being dramatic. They were both wrong. I wasn't a freeloader. This was my home, and I was not going to die in silence. I clicked the small power button. A tiny red light blinked to life. The battery was still good. A slow, determined smile spread across my face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The game had just changed. Holding that small recorder in my hand, I felt a current of forgotten strength flow back into me. It wasn't the fiery rage of a woman wronged, not yet. It was something colder, quieter, and far more dangerous. The focused resolve of a nurse with a critical patient. And the patient was me. The diagnosis was clear. I was suffering from a parasitic infection named Vanessa, and my son was the compromised immune system allowing it to thrive. The treatment would require precision, patience, and a carefully executed plan. My first step was to become the person Vanessa believed I already was. I had to fully inhabit the role she had written for me. The frail, confused, and utterly dependent old woman. It was the perfect camouflage. My weakness would become my shield, and my supposed senility would be my greatest weapon. I began the next morning. I came into the kitchen while Vanessa was making coffee and forgot where the sugar was, a canister that hadn't moved its location in 40 years. I watched her sigh, a theatrical display of weary patience for David's benefit, as he was grabbing his briefcase to leave for work. "It's right here, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with condescension as she tapped the canister. "Same place it always is." "Oh, silly me," I said with a vacant smile. I saw David give her a sympathetic look over my head before kissing her goodbye. "Hang in there," he mouthed to her. The performance was working. They were both falling for it. The digital recorder became a permanent extension of my body. It was small enough to fit into the deep pocket of the faded floral housecoat I now wore constantly. The gentle click of the record button was almost silent. I practiced turning it on and off in my pocket until the movement was as natural as breathing. All I needed was the right moment. It came a few days later. Vanessa was on her laptop at the kitchen table, paying bills online. I could see the tension in her jaw as she clicked through various accounts. With the recorder running in my pocket, I shuffled over to her. "Vanessa, dear," I began, my voice intentionally thin and reedy. "You know the church bake sale is this Sunday. I was hoping I could get just a little cash. Maybe $20? I'd love to buy some of Betty's famous pecan pie and support the fund for the new roof." Vanessa didn't look up from her screen. "We don't have $20 to spare for pie, Martha." "Oh," I said, feigning disappointment. "It's just that Richard and we always contributed. It's for a good cause. Even $10 would be wonderful." This time, she did look up. Her eyes were as hard and cold as river stones. "Let me be clear, because I don't want to have this conversation again. You don't have any money? The money you think you have is what is keeping this roof over your head. It's what pays for the food you eat and the electricity you use. It is not for you to waste on overpriced pies and nosy old women. You are not to ask me for money again. Do you understand?" I let my lower lip tremble. "Yes, dear, I understand. I'm sorry to have bothered you." "Good," she said, turning back to her computer, dismissing me completely. I shuffled back to my armchair, my heart pounding not with fear but with a grim, triumphant thrum. I reached into my pocket and felt the small, hard shape of the recorder. I had it. I had the truth of her song. It was the first piece of evidence, the first stone I would use to build my case against her. Now that I had a weapon, I needed an ally. My thoughts went immediately to Gloria. But how could I reach her? My every move was monitored. I couldn't just walk across the street. Vanessa had become adept at appearing from nowhere the moment I got near the front door. I needed a plan, a diversion. My opportunity came during a classic Texas thunderstorm. The rain was coming down in sheets, the sky a bruised purple-gray. Vanessa hated storms. They made her anxious and irritable. She was pacing the living room, complaining about the noise. It was the perfect time. Chaos was my friend. "Oh my," I said, standing up from my chair and looking towards the back of the house. "That leak in the laundry room, I think I hear it dripping again. With all this rain." It was a lie. Richard had fixed that leak years ago. But Vanessa didn't know that. Annoyance warred with anxiety on her face. "Seriously? Of all the times," she muttered, stomping off towards the back of the house to check. The moment she was out of sight, my carefully practiced frailty vanished. I moved with a speed and purpose I hadn't felt in years. I'd already written the note on a small piece of paper from a notepad hidden under my mattress. It was short and to the point. "Gloria, I'm in trouble. They've taken my phone, my money. I'm not sick, I'm a prisoner. Please help me. Find a reason to come to the back fence tomorrow at 3 p.m. Don't call. Martha." I'd sealed it inside a small plastic sandwich bag to protect it from the rain. I had it in my other pocket, ready. I hurried to the front door, my heart hammering against my ribs. My hands, which had been so clumsy just that morning, were now steady as I unlocked the deadbolt. The wind and rain lashed at me as I opened the door, just wide enough to slip out. The cold rain was a shock, soaking my thin housecoat in seconds, but I barely felt it. My entire being was focused on one goal: Gloria's mailbox across the street. I scurried across the lawn, head down, praying no one would look out their window at this exact moment. The street was a rushing river. I reached her mailbox, my arthritic fingers fumbling with the cold, wet metal latch. I shoved the plastic-wrapped note inside, slammed the door shut, and ran back. I was back inside, the deadbolt locked and dripping in the entryway, just as Vanessa came back from the laundry room. "There's no drip," she said, her voice sharp with accusation. Then she saw me. "My God, Martha, what happened to you? You're soaked. Were you standing with the door open?" I drew on all my reserves and gave her the most confused, vacant look I could manage. "The wind, dear," I stammered, shivering for effect. "It blew the door open with such a bang, it startled me. I was just trying to close it." She looked at me. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. But my act was flawless. I looked like a pathetic, drenched old woman who couldn't even manage to close a door properly. The suspicion in her eyes faded, replaced by the familiar look of utter contempt. "For heaven's sake, you're useless," she snapped. "Go and get changed before you make a bigger mess on the floor." I obeyed meekly, but as I walked up the stairs to my room, a fire was burning inside me. Useless. She could call me useless all she wanted. I had done it. I had sent out my message in a bottle. Now all I could do was watch the storm rage outside my window and pray that my one and only friend would find it. The storm outside raged all night, a perfect mirror for the turmoil in my own heart. I barely slept, my mind racing. Had Gloria found the note? Was it still legible after being soaked? What if a neighbor had seen me? Every creak of the old house, every howl of the wind, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and deceptively peaceful. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I moved through the day in a fog of feigned incompetence and genuine anxiety. I accidentally put a red sock in with the whites, turning David's work shirts a faint, streaky pink. Vanessa's fury was a quiet, seething thing, which was far more terrifying than her shouting. She held up a ruined shirt, her knuckles white, and simply said, "You are costing us a fortune, Martha." The words were meant to wound, and they did, but I absorbed them, filed them away, and focused on the single point of light at the end of this long, dark tunnel. 3 p.m. As the hour approached, I knew I needed a reason to be in the backyard. My eyes landed on the neglected rose bushes Richard and I had planted along the back fence. They were spindly and choked with weeds, a sad testament to my recent captivity. It was the perfect excuse. I found Vanessa in the living room, scrolling through her phone. "Dear," I said, my voice wavering slightly, "the sun is so lovely after the storm. I thought I might go out and pull a few of those nasty weeds from around my poor roses. A little fresh air would do me good." She glanced up, her eyes narrowed. For a moment, I thought she would refuse, but then a smirk played on her lips. "Fine," she said. "Try not to fall and break a hip. We can't afford the hospital bills." Her cruelty was a shield, and I walked out the back door into the humid afternoon air, the words bouncing off the armor of my resolve. The sun was warm on my back. I knelt in the soft, damp earth by the fence, my hands making a show of pulling at the stubborn weeds. My back was to the house, but I felt Vanessa's eyes on me through the kitchen window. I had to appear completely natural. Every muscle in my body was tense, my ears straining for any sound from across the street. Minutes ticked by. 3. Then, 3:05. A cold dread began to seep into me. Maybe she didn't get the note. Maybe she thought it was a prank. Maybe she was scared. I kept my head down, my hands moving mechanically, my hope beginning to wither like the roses I was tending. Then I heard it. A faint snap of a twig from behind the tall hedge that separated our properties. "Darn cat," a familiar voice muttered, just loud enough to carry. "Tiger? You back here again, you little rascal?" My heart leaped. It was Gloria. I didn't turn around. I kept pulling weeds, my knuckles brushing the dirt. "He's a sneaky one," I said, my voice a low murmur. "Always getting into my petunias." I heard more rustling, and then Gloria's voice was closer, right on the other side of the wooden fence. "I know you didn't write me a note to talk about my cat, Martha." Tears pricked my eyes. "You got it," I whispered, relief washing over me in a dizzying wave. "Of course I got it. I've been worried sick about you for months," she said, her voice a fierce, urgent whisper. "That daughter-in-law of yours is a viper. I see the way she looks at you. I knew something was wrong when you stopped working in your garden. Martha Coleman would never let her prize-winning roses get choked by weeds." Hearing her say it, hearing my own fears validated by someone else, was enough to make me break. A single sob escaped me. Now, none of that," Gloria said sternly, though her voice was thick with emotion. "We don't have time for tears. We have time for action. Tell me everything. Quickly." In a torrent of hushed words, I told her. The phone, the bank card, the passbook, the constant insults, and the gaslighting. I told her about the recorder in my pocket and the cruel conversation I had already captured. Gloria listened without interruption, a grime silence on her end of the fence. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "That's good," she finally said. "The recording is very good. That's hard evidence. But we need more. We need the paper trail. Financial abuse is what will put her away." "But how?" I despaired. "She controls everything. I can't even get the mail." "Leave that to me," Gloria said, her voice filled with the no-nonsense authority of a teacher who had handled unruly teenagers for 40 years. "My nephew, the one in Dallas? He's a paralegal. He told me all about this stuff. He knows a lawyer here in Austin, a man named Sam Rodriguez. He works pro bono, for free, on elder abuse cases. He's the real deal. But he won't move without concrete proof." She paused, and I could hear her thinking. "Here's what we'll do. I'm going to the bank tomorrow. I'll tell them I'm Martha Coleman and that I've lost my online banking password and need to have paper statements sent out. They'll ask for security questions. What's your mother's maiden name?" "Peterson," I whispered. "Eleanor Peterson. Date of birth, May 12, 1957. First pet's name? Scamp. He was a terrier mix." "Good, that should be enough," Gloria said. "I'll rent a post office box this afternoon. I'll have them send all your statements for the last 2 years there. That will show every withdrawal, every transfer Vanessa has made." It was brilliant, like so simple and yet so far beyond what I could have conceived on my own. "Gloria, I started, my voice thick with gratitude. "Martha," Vanessa's voice sliced through the air from the back door. "Are you done yet? You've been out there for 20 minutes. You'll get a sunstroke." Panic seized me. I shot up from the ground, my head spinning. "I'm coming," I called back, trying to keep the terror out of my voice. "Go," Gloria whispered urgently. "Don't give her any reason to be suspicious. Keep that recorder on you at all times. Act weak. Be the victim. Your day is coming, Martha. I promise you." I scurried back towards the house, my knees aching, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Vanessa was standing at the door with her arms crossed, her face a mask of irritation. "You look flushed," she said, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of deception. "I knew this was a bad idea. Go inside and drink some water. The last thing I need is to have to rush you to the emergency room." I nodded meekly and shuffled past her into the cool darkness of the house. But this time, the darkness didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a staging ground. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my belly, but it was no longer alone. It was joined by a fierce, blazing hope. I had a plan. I had an ally. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like Martha Lee Coleman, the fighter, was finally coming home. The days following my secret meeting with Gloria were a masterclass in deception. I played my part with an Oscar-worthy performance, leaning into the role of a frail, fading woman. I would misplace things, a salt shaker, a throw pillow, only to have Vanessa find them with a dramatic, long-suffering sigh. I would ask the same question twice in the span of 10 minutes just to see the flash of irritation in her eyes. Each time she treated me like a child, each condescending remark she made was another drop of fuel on the fire inside me. And all the while, the small silver recorder was my constant companion, silently witnessing, silently documenting. I captured so much. I recorded her muttering under her breath about how I was useless after I accidentally spilled a glass of water. I recorded a phone call she made to a friend where she complained loudly about having to babysit a grown woman and how she couldn't wait until they could finally get this over with. Each recording was a victory, a small piece of the truth she couldn't hide. Meanwhile, Gloria was my silent general, moving pieces on a chessboard Vanessa didn't even know she was playing on. A week after our meeting at the fence, a plain, unmarked envelope arrived. I knew it must be from Gloria. But Vanessa always got to the mail first. I watched from the window as she sorted through the day's letters, my heart in my throat. She glanced at the plain envelope, saw it was addressed to me, and with a casual flick of her wrist, tossed it onto the small table in the entryway where the junk mail accumulated. She hadn't even deemed it important enough to open. Her arrogance was my greatest ally. I had to wait for hours, a torturous eternity, until she left for her weekly grocery run. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I was at that table like a shot. My trembling fingers tore open the envelope. Inside was a key and a small, neatly printed note. Martha, this is the key to P.O. Box 724 at the post office on Elm Street. The first batch of bank statements should be there. I'll keep checking it for you. This key is your copy. Hide it well. Your lawyer is Sam Rodriguez. I've spoken with his paralegal. He is waiting for us to gather enough evidence to build an ironclad case. Stay strong. Gee. I clutched the small, cold key in my hand. It felt heavier than a simple piece of metal. It felt like the key to my freedom. Hiding it was the next challenge. Every drawer, every box in my room felt unsafe, discoverable. Then my eyes landed on the antique grandfather clock Richard's father had built, standing silent in the corner of my bedroom. It hadn't worked in years, but I could never bear to part with it. I gently opened the glass door and reached inside. Behind the heavy, motionless brass pendulum was a small, dark cavity. I tucked the key deep inside, its secret safe within the heart of a silent, sleeping giant. With Gloria handling the financial documents, my job was to focus on the personal. I needed to document the emotional abuse, the isolation. So I started a diary. It was an old, leather-bound journal I'd kept empty for years. Now, it became my sanctuary. At night, with my door locked, I would write. I wrote down every insult, every dismissive gesture, every lie Vanessa told David. I documented the dates and times of her outbursts. I described the crushing feeling of being invisible in my own home. I poured all the pain, fear, and burgeoning anger onto those pages, and with every word, I felt a piece of myself returning. One evening, an unexpected opportunity arose. David came home early, looking exhausted. Vanessa was out at a book club meeting. It was the first time we'd been truly alone in weeks. He found me in the living room, staring out the window. "Hey, Mom," he said, slumping onto the sofa. "Tough day." My first instinct was to remain silent, to stick to the plan. But looking at my son, seeing the lines of stress around his eyes, the mother in me couldn't stay quiet. "Would you like a cup of tea, honey?" I asked, my voice soft. He looked surprised by the offer. "Yeah, Mom, that'd be nice. Thanks." As I prepared the tea in the kitchen, I decided to take a risk. I brought our cups into the living room and sat in the armchair opposite him. "David," I began gently, "are you happy?" He blinked, taken aback by the directness of the question. "What do you mean?" "I mean here, with me. Is Is this working for you and Vanessa? He ran a hand through his hair and sighed, a sound heavy with a weariness that went beyond a simple tough day at work. It's an adjustment, Mom. It's a lot of pressure. Vanessa carries most of the burden. The recorder was on in my pocket. My heart hammered against my ribs. What kind of burden, David? You know, he said, avoiding my eyes. Making sure you're okay, managing the house, the finances. She worries about you constantly. She says your memory that you're getting more confused. She's worried you'll fall or leave the stove on. Here it was. The foundation of lies she had so carefully constructed. I had to tread carefully. And you? Do you think I'm confused? I asked, my voice level. He finally looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a glimpse of the son I used to know. I don't know, Mom. Sometimes, you seem fine, just like your old self. But then Vanessa tells me these things, and I don't know what to think. I'm at work all day. She's the one here with you. David, I said, leaning forward, my voice dropping to a near whisper. What if she's not telling you the whole truth? He recoiled slightly, a defensive look clouding his face. What is that supposed to mean? Mom, Vanessa loves you. She's doing her best in a difficult situation. Is she? I pressed, my heart aching. Or is she making the situation seem more difficult than it is? Has it ever occurred to you that maybe, just maybe, I'm not the one who needs help? He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. The question hung in the air between us, charged and dangerous. I had planted a seed of doubt. I didn't know if it would take root or if he would let Vanessa's influence poison it before it had the chance to grow. But it was a start. Before he could answer, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the tension. Vanessa was home. The front door opened, and she walked in, her face bright and smiling until she saw us sitting there, the empty teacups between us. Her smile faltered, and her eyes darted from me to David, instantly suspicious. Well, what's all this? She asked, her voice dangerously light. David stood up, suddenly flustered. Oh, hey, honey. Mom and I were just having some tea. I can see that, she said, her gaze settling on me, cold and hard. I retreated back into my role, shrinking into my chair, my face a mask of placid confusion. I hope you weren't tiring her out, David. You know how she gets. No, of course not, he said quickly. She walked over and placed a condescending kiss on the top of my head. Time for bed, don't you think, Mom? I nodded meekly and allowed David to help me up from the chair. But as I walked past Vanessa, our eyes met for a fraction of a second. In that moment, the pretense fell away, and I saw pure, unadulterated animosity in her gaze. And she saw something in mine, too. Not weakness, not confusion. She saw the fighter. And for the first time, I think she was afraid. The fear I saw in Vanessa's eyes that night was a potent fuel. It confirmed my strategy was working. She had built her power on the assumption of my weakness, and now that the foundation was cracking, she was becoming unstable. Her cruelty, which had been a casual, almost lazy weapon, was now honed into a sharp, deliberate tool. She was on high alert, watching my every move, searching for any sign that my senile act was just that, an act. This new level of scrutiny made my mission infinitely more dangerous. I had to be more careful than ever. The recorder stayed in my pocket, but I was more selective about when I used it, saving the battery for moments of true venom. My diary entries became shorter, written in a cramped shorthand in the dead of night, my ear pressed to the door, listening for any footsteps in the hall. Gloria became my lifeline, a steady hand in the storm. We developed a new, safer system of communication. Every Wednesday on trash day, I would place a small, smooth stone on top of the lid of our bin if I needed to talk. If she had something for me, she'd do the same. It was a silent, simple signal that Vanessa would never notice. One Wednesday, I saw the stone on her bin. My heart began to pound. It had been nearly 3 weeks since she'd rented the P.O. box. That afternoon, I waited for Vanessa to get absorbed in one of her reality TV shows, the volume turned up loud. I slipped out the back door under the pretense of watering the long-suffering petunias. I found the package tucked inside my watering can, which I deliberately left by the back fence. It was a thick manila envelope, surprisingly heavy. I hid it under my loose-fitting housecoat and scurried back inside, my mind racing. I had to wait until after midnight, until the house was completely still and dark, before I dared to look. Locking my bedroom door, I sat on the floor, using the faint moonlight from the window as my only illumination. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies of my bank statements from the past 2 years. I spread them out on the rug, a mosaic of my financial life. At first glance, it was just a sea of numbers. But then I started to look closer, and a story began to emerge. A story of systematic theft. There were the regular, expected entries. My Social Security deposits, my nursing pension. But woven between them was a pattern of withdrawals I didn't recognize. Small at first, $50 here, $100 there, categorized as cash withdrawal from an ATM across town. Then the amounts grew. There were charges from high-end department stores I hadn't set foot in for over a decade. A $600 charge at Neiman Marcus. An $800 charge at a designer boutique downtown. Then I saw the transfers. Large round sums of money. $5,000, then $10,000, moved from my savings account into a checking account I didn't recognize. My savings. Richard's and my life's work. The money we'd set aside for our old age, for emergencies, for David. It was being drained, siphoned away into an unknown account. But the final pages held the most devastating blow. 3 months ago, there was a single massive withdrawal from my savings account. $50,000. The memo line contained 2 words, loan repayment. I stared at the words, my blood turning to ice. I had never taken out a loan in my life. Richard and I were children of the Depression. We prided ourselves on never owing anyone a dime. Where had that money gone? Who had it been paid to? The scale of her betrayal was breathtaking. This wasn't just about controlling me or stealing a few $100s for shopping sprees. This was a calculated, long-term plan to gut my finances completely. She wasn't just a parasite. She was a predator, and she was picking my bones clean. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the proof of my own destruction, and felt a profound, soul-deep rage. It was no longer just about getting my house back. It was about justice. It was about the nurse in me who had fought for Mrs. Gable for the little boy with the bruises. I had to fight for Martha Coleman. The next day, I placed the stone on our trash bin. Our meeting at the fence was brief and tense. I passed the copies through a gap in the slats. $50,000? Gloria whispered, her eyes wide with shock as she scanned the final page. My God, Martha, this is grand larceny. What do I do, Gloria? I asked, my voice shaking with fury. You do exactly what Sam Rodriguez says to do, she replied, her own voice hardening with resolve. I'm taking these to him this afternoon. Don't do anything. Don't confront her. Don't even look at her differently. You are a sweet, confused old lady who doesn't know a thing. Can you do that? I nodded, my jaw tight. I can. Good, she said. Because the end is coming, Martha, and it's going to be a storm bigger than any of us can imagine. Living with that knowledge was the hardest part of my performance. Looking at Vanessa as she chattered on about her day, knowing she had stolen my life savings, was a daily exercise in monumental self-control. I channeled all my rage, all my pain, into my role. My hands developed a slight, convincing tremor. My gaze became more distant. I was so convincing that even David, on one of his brief weekend appearances, took me aside. Mom, he said, his voice thick with a clumsy manufactured concern he'd learned from his wife. Vanessa and I have been talking. We think it might be time to have you see a specialist. Someone who can help with your memory. I looked into my son's eyes and felt a pang of pity for him. He was a pawn in her game, a willing fool. Whatever you think is best, dear, I said, patting his hand with my trembling one. His face flooded with relief. It was so much easier for him to believe I was sick than to believe his wife was a monster. Good, he said, squeezing my hand. We'll look into it. We just want what's best for you. I simply smiled, a sad, vacant smile. He had no idea what was best for me. But he was about to find out. The meeting with the specialist was set for the following Friday. Vanessa arranged everything. She chose a doctor from a glossy brochure, a man whose polished smile and pristine office promised discreet, upscale care. To her, it was just another box to tick in her plan, get an official diagnosis of senility or dementia to justify her ultimate goal of having me declared incompetent. It was a crucial step toward gaining full legal control. To me, it was a stage, and I was preparing for the most important performance of my life. Gloria and I had one final, whispered conversation over the back fence the day before the appointment. Sam has everything, Martha, she told me, her voice a low, steady hum of reassurance. The bank statements, the transcripts of your recordings, your journal entries. He says it's one of the most well-documented cases of elder abuse he's ever seen. He's ready. He just needs one more thing. What is it? I whispered back, my heart drumming. He needs an independent, professional witness to your mental state. This doctor's appointment tomorrow? It's a gift. Sam wants you to be completely lucidly yourself. Answer every question with the clarity and intelligence of the nurse you were for 30 years. Don't play the victim. Don't act confused. Be Martha Coleman. He will use the doctor's official assessment of your sharp mind as the final nail in her coffin. A cold, clear sense of purpose washed over me. For months, my safety had been in pretending to be weak. Now, my victory lay in revealing my strength. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair, the leather worn smooth from years of use, and I prepared. I went over the details of my life, the names of medications I used to administer, the dates of historical events, the plot of the last book I'd read. I was sharpening my mind, honing it into a weapon she would never see coming. The next day, Vanessa drove me to the appointment. She was cloyingly attentive, patting my hand and speaking to me in the slow, simple sentences one would use for a toddler. Now, this doctor is a very nice man, Mom. He's just going to ask you a few simple questions. There's nothing to be afraid of. I'm not afraid, dear, I said, my voice quiet but steady. She gave me a sharp look, surprised by my lack of feigned nervousness. Dr. Miller's office was sterile and modern, all glass and brushed steel. He was a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. Vanessa insisted on coming into the examination room with me, positioning herself as my concerned caregiver. Thank you for seeing us, Doctor, she began, launching into her well-rehearsed speech. I'm Vanessa Coleman, Martha's daughter-in-law. We've become increasingly worried about her. There's significant memory loss, confusion, moments of being completely disconnected from reality. We're just so worried about her safety. Dr. Miller nodded, his gaze resting on me. I see. Mrs. Coleman, how are you feeling today? This was it. Showtime. I am feeling quite well, thank you, Doctor, I said, my voice clear and articulate. Though I must admit, I am feeling a bit frustrated. Frustrated? Why is that? He asked, leaning forward slightly, his interest piqued. Because my daughter-in-law has just described a person I don't recognize, I said, looking directly into his eyes. I am not disconnected from reality. My memory is, for a woman of 68, quite excellent. For example, I can tell you that the last book I read was The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, a fascinating exploration of identity and race. I can also tell you that the capital of Mongolia is Ulaanbaatar, a fact I learned from a documentary last week. And I can most certainly tell you that my daughter-in-law's concern is not for my well-being, but for her own financial gain. The air in the room went still. Vanessa's jaw dropped. She looked as if I had just slapped her. Martha, what on earth are you saying? Doctor, you see, this is what I mean. Delusions, paranoia. Dr. Miller held up a hand, silencing her, but his eyes never left mine. He began to ask me a series of standard cognitive assessment questions. Who is the current president? What is today's full date? Count backward from 100 by sevens. I answered each one calmly, precisely, and correctly. He then moved on to more complex questions, asking me to interpret proverbs and recall detailed stories. I met every challenge head-on. For 30 minutes, I was the nurse again. I was the sharp, competent woman who had managed medication schedules for an entire hospital wing, who had comforted families, who had saved lives. The fog of the past few months lifted, burned away by the heat of my own intellect. When he was done, Dr. Miller leaned back in his chair and made a small note on his pad. He looked from me to Vanessa, who was sitting rigid in her chair, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Mrs. Coleman, he said to me, a note of respect in his voice. You have one of the sharpest, most lucid minds I've had the pleasure of examining in quite some time. There is absolutely no clinical evidence of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any significant cognitive decline. You are, in my professional opinion, perfectly competent. Then he turned his calm, assessing gaze on Vanessa, which makes your description of her symptoms all the more puzzling. Vanessa began to sputter, her composure completely shattered. But you don't see her at home. She forgets things constantly. She gets lost. She's a danger to herself." "Is she?" Dr. Miller asked, his voice gentle but with an underlying edge of steel. "Or is it perhaps convenient for you to believe that she is?" The color drained from Vanessa's face. She had walked into what she thought was an execution chamber, only to find herself in the witness box. She stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. I won't sit here and be insulted. We're leaving." She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my bicep like claws. "Come on, Martha." I didn't move. I looked at Dr. Miller. "Thank you for your time, doctor. You have been most helpful." He simply nodded, his eyes full of a new understanding. The car ride home was silent, but it was a silence thick with menace. Vanessa's hands were clamped so tightly on the steering wheel her knuckles were white. She didn't look at me, but I could feel the waves of her fury radiating across the car. She had been exposed. Her plan had been derailed. And she knew, with dawning horror, that I was the one who had derailed it. The game was no longer a secret. And as we pulled into the driveway of my house, I knew the final confrontation was no longer a question of if, but when. And it would be soon. The house had become a pressure cooker. The silence that fell between us after the disastrous doctor's appointment was heavier and more menacing than any argument. Vanessa moved through the rooms like a phantom, her face a pale, tight mask of fury. The condescending sweetness was gone, replaced by a chilling, watchful stillness. She knew she had lost a major battle, but I knew she hadn't yet surrendered the war. She was a cornered animal, and that made her more unpredictable and dangerous than ever. David was a ghost. He avoided me, avoided his wife, and took refuge in long hours at the office. When he was home, he was withdrawn, the seed of doubt I had planted warring with years of his wife's careful manipulation. The air was thick with unspoken truths and simmering rage, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it all exploded. The explosion came 2 days later. I had spoken to Gloria that morning, using our trash can signal. The message was simple. Sam Rodriguez was ready. The police had been briefed. All the legal documents were in place. He had told me what to expect, what Vanessa's last desperate move would likely be, and what I needed to do. He told me to stay calm, stay strong, and let her walk into the trap. "The final piece of evidence, Martha," he had said, "is to let her try to commit the final act." That evening, Vanessa called a family meeting. Those were her exact words. She summoned David home early from work and told me to be in the dining room at 7 o'clock sharp. When I walked in, the scene was set. David was sitting at the head of the table, looking pale and miserable. Vanessa stood opposite him, her hands resting on a stack of glossy papers. It was a formal, sterile arrangement, like a corporate boardroom where a hostile takeover was about to take place. "Sit down, Martha," she commanded, her voice devoid of any warmth. I sat, my back straight, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Inside my housecoat pocket, my fingers rested on the coal metal of Richard's voice recorder. "David and I have done a lot of thinking," Vanessa began, her eyes fixed on me. "Your episode at the doctor's office was deeply concerning. It's clear you're not just forgetful. You're becoming delusional, paranoid. You're a danger to yourself and, frankly, a liability to us." David flinched at her harsh words but said nothing. He just stared at the polished surface of the table. "We can't go on like this," Vanessa continued. She slid one of the glossy brochures across the table to me. The cover showed a beautiful, sprawling building surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens and smiling, silver-haired residents. The name was printed in elegant script, "The Willows Assisted Living." "We found a wonderful place for you," she said. "It's one of the best facilities in the state. You'll have 24-hour nursing care, planned activities, and you'll be safe. We've already put down a deposit on a private room for you." I looked at the brochure, then at her. I said nothing. My silence unnerved her. "This is for the best, Martha," she pressed. "You need more care than we can provide." She then pushed a sheaf of legal documents and a pen across the table. "These are the admission forms and an agreement that gives us power of attorney to manage your affairs and to sell this house to cover the costs of your care. It's all standard. We need you to sign them." This was it. The final act. I looked at my son. "David, is this what you want?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at his hands, his voice a choked whisper. "Mom, maybe it's for the best. You'll be looked after." He was a coward. My heart broke for the man he could have been, but my resolve hardened. I was truly on my own. I pushed the papers back across the table. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I will not be signing anything." Vanessa's eyes blazed. "Don't be ridiculous. You don't have a choice." "Oh, I believe I do," I replied calmly. "This is my house. These are my affairs, and I am, as Dr. Miller professionally attested, perfectly competent to manage them myself." "You are a sick old woman," she shrieked, her composure finally cracking completely. "David, tell her she has to do this." David looked up, his face a mess of conflict and misery. "Mom, please, just make it easy." I shook my head slowly, not at him, but at the tragedy of it all. Then, I turned my full attention to Vanessa. "You know, Vanessa, for months you've been telling David and trying to convince me that I'm confused, that my memory is failing. But the truth is, my memory has become quite sharp. I remember everything." I reached into my pocket and slowly, deliberately, placed the small silver recorder on the center of the dining room table. Vanessa stared at it, her eyes widening in confusion, not yet understanding its significance. "For example," I said, pressing the play button, "I remember this conversation." Her voice, tinny and sharp, filled the silent room. "You are a freeloader, Martha, a burden living in our house." David physically recoiled as if he'd been burned. He stared at the recorder, then at his wife, his face turning ashen. "Vanessa, what is that?" "It's nothing. She's edited it. It's taken out of context," she stammered, her eyes wild with panic. "Is it?" I said, stopping the recording. "Then perhaps you can provide some context for these." I reached into the other pocket of my housecoat and pulled out the thick sack of photocopied bank statements. I fanned them out on the table like a winning hand of cards. "I remember wondering where my money was going," I said, my voice cold as ice. I slid the first statement in front of David. "Do you remember this shopping spree at Neiman Marcus, dear?" "I certainly don't." I slid another. "Or these cash withdrawals from ATMs I've never been to?" I slid another. "Or these transfers, Vanessa. Thousands and thousands of dollars moved from my savings account." David's hands were shaking as he picked up the papers. He stared at the numbers, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at his wife, truly looked at her, and the years of lies and manipulation fell away from his eyes. He saw her. "And finally," I said, my voice dropping as I pushed the last, most damning page toward him, "there's this. A $50,000 withdrawal to repay a loan I never took out. A loan which my lawyer discovered was used as a down payment on a condominium in your name, Vanessa. A little nest egg for when you were finally rid of the burden." Vanessa stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing silently, no sound coming out. She was trapped, exposed, the full architecture of her greed laid bare on the polished wood of my dining room table. David dropped the papers as if they were on fire. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The look on his face was one of utter devastation, a man staring into the wreckage of his own life. "Vanessa," he whispered, the single word a universe of pain and betrayal. "Tell me it's not true." She couldn't. She just stared at me, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. In the ringing silence that followed, the doorbell chimed. Once. Twice. Vanessa and David both jumped at the sound, their heads snapping toward the door. I, however, remained perfectly calm. I stood up from my chair, my legs steady for the first time in a year. "Excuse me," I said. "I'll get that." I walked from the dining room down the familiar hallway and opened my front door. Standing on the porch, bathed in the soft evening light, were Gloria, a well-dressed, serious-looking man in his 40s who I knew must be Sam Rodriguez, and two uniformed police officers. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Good evening, gentlemen. Gloria, you're right on time. Please come in." I turned and looked back down the hall at the dining room, where my son was crumbling and my daughter-in-law stood cornered by her own deceit. The power had shifted. The storm had finally broken. And justice had arrived at my front door. Time seemed to slow down as the officers stepped across my threshold. They were calm, professional, their presence filling the space with an undeniable authority that Vanessa's histrionics could not touch. Sam Rodriguez stepped forward, his expression serious but compassionate. He looked at me and gave a slight, affirming nod before turning his attention to the scene in the dining room. "Mr. Coleman? Miss Coleman?" he said, his voice even and steady. My name is Sam Rodriguez. I am an attorney representing Martha Coleman. Vanessa, who had been frozen in place, finally snapped. This is insane. This is my house. You can't just barge in here. I'm calling our lawyer. I believe you'll find that this is in fact Mrs. Coleman's house, Sam said calmly. He placed a leather-bound folder on the entryway table. And I'm afraid your lawyer will be quite busy. In this folder, we have copies of 2 years of bank statements detailing numerous unauthorized withdrawals and transfers. We have sworn affidavits from neighbors. We have a full psychiatric evaluation confirming Mrs. Coleman's complete mental competence. And, he paused, looking at the small silver recorder still sitting on the dining room table, we have hours of audio recordings documenting a pattern of verbal and psychological abuse. One of the officers stepped forward, addressing Vanessa directly. Ma'am, we have a warrant to arrest you on suspicion of larceny and elder abuse. The fight seemed to drain out of her all at once, replaced by a desperate, snarling panic. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape that wasn't there. She turned on David, her last-ditch effort to deflect blame. David, are you going to let them do this? It was for us. Everything I did was for us. Tell them. But David wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, his face a hollow mask of shame. The man he saw in the mirror, a good son, a loving husband, had been a fraud, a character in a play his wife had written. He didn't say a word. Her final appeal, met with his shattered silence, was the end. As the female officer recited her Miranda rights, Vanessa's facade of the sophisticated, put-together woman crumbled into dust. She was just a common thief, her greed laid bare under the soft lights of the home she had tried to steal. There was no screaming or fighting as they led her away. She went quietly, her head bowed, a small, defeated figure. I felt no joy in watching her go. Just a profound, weary sense of justice, like a fever that had finally broken. When the front door closed, a silence descended upon the house that was deeper than any I had ever known. It was just me and David, left in the wreckage. He finally turned to me, his body trembling, tears streaming down his face. Mom, he choked out, the word thick with the pain I hadn't heard in his voice since he was a small boy who'd fallen from his bicycle. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know. I looked at my son, my only child, and my heart ached with a complicated mix of love and profound disappointment. Didn't you, David? I asked, my voice not harsh but heavy with the weight of the truth. Or was it just easier not to know? Was it easier to believe your wife than to look at your own mother and see that something was terribly wrong? I was a fool, he sobbed, sinking into a dining room chair and burying his face in his hands. I was a blind, stupid fool. I let her do this to you. In your own home. In Dad's house. I'm so sorry. His apology was real, his anguish genuine. I knew he would carry this guilt for the rest of his life. But forgiveness was not a simple gift I could hand him to ease his burden. It was something that would have to be earned over a long, long time. The apologies are for you to wrestle with, David, I said quietly. Not for me to accept right now. We have a lot to figure out, and it's not going to be easy. Our relationship didn't magically heal that night. Trust, once shattered, is not so easily glued back together. He moved out the next day. The road ahead of us was uncertain, but for the first time it was honest. 1 year later. The silence in my house is different now. It is no longer an ache, it is a peaceful, welcome companion. The first few months were about reclaiming my space, both physically and emotionally. I smudged every room with sage, a silly ritual an old nurse friend suggested, but it felt good to watch the smoke curl into the corners where so much sadness had lived, cleansing it all away. David and I started therapy, both separately and together. There were painful, difficult conversations. There were tears and long silences. He had divorced Vanessa, who, through a plea bargain arranged by Sam, avoided a long prison sentence but was serving 2 years of probation and was ordered to pay significant restitution. Most of the money was gone, of course, spent on a life we were never a part of. But I hadn't done it for the money. Slowly, tentatively, my son and I began to build a new relationship. He showed up. Not with grand gestures, but with small, consistent acts of service. He'd come over on Saturdays to help me with the yard work. He'd sit on the porch swing and just listen, really listen for the first time in years. He never asked for forgiveness again. He was too busy trying to be a man who deserved it. And I had found a new purpose. With Gloria by my side and with a small inheritance I received from a distant aunt, we started a nonprofit organization. We rented a small office space in a local community center and put a name on the door, Voices of Silver. We became a resource hub for elderly individuals in Texas facing abuse. We offer a helpline, connect them with pro bono lawyers like Sam Rodriguez, and host support groups where they can share their stories without shame. David designed our website and manages all our technical needs. He's one of our most dedicated volunteers. My story, once my secret shame, became my most powerful tool. I started speaking at churches, at senior centers, at town hall meetings, sharing what had happened to me, not for pity, but for empowerment. Which brings me to today. The sun is warm on my shoulders. I'm kneeling in the rich, dark soil of my front garden, a place I hadn't touched in what felt like a lifetime. The old, neglected rose bushes have been cleared away. Next to me, also on her knees, is Gloria, her face beaming. Between us is a flat of brand new rose bushes, their buds tight with the promise of future blooms. David is here too. He's turning over the soil, preparing a new bed for us. He works quietly, diligently, a comfortable peace having settled between us. As I place the first new rose bush into the earth, I think about the journey that brought me here. The pain, the fear, the fight. I look at the house, my house, standing proud and safe behind me. I look at my dear friend and my son, my family, forged anew in the fires of truth. It's going to be beautiful, Martha, Gloria says, patting the soil around her own plant. Yes, I say, my voice full of a certainty that comes from deep in my soul. Yes, it is. When you get older, they think you're weak. But I learned that weakness is temporary, while dignity is something no one ever has the right to take away. My name is Martha Lee Coleman, and this is not just the story of how my life was almost destroyed. It is the story of how I learned to plant roses again. Thank you for being with me through that. Sharing my story isn't easy, but I do it because I know I'm not the only one. If anything you heard today resonated with you, or if it made you think of someone in your own life, please don't stay silent. Reach out, talk to someone, and know that your voice deserves to be heard. If you found value in our time together, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel, Voices of Auntie Sandra. Don't forget to click the little bell icon so you won't miss our next story. And please, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your kindness and support create a community here, and that means the world to me. Until next time, be kind to yourself and be kind to each other. Goodbye for now.